So, as of today, we're getting divorced. My mistress said she didn't want to deal with the caregiving of my mom, so I left it all to you.
What?
I gasped, utterly shocked by the sudden mention of divorce and mistress.
Mistress.
I managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. Mike raised his chin and laughed, as if he were proud of himself. Despite his infidelity, he had the audacity to call her his girlfriend and claim that it was serious. He showed me a picture of his mistress, grinning repulsively, seemingly unaware of how disgusting he looked.
Fine.
Here, the divorce papers, I said, thrusting the documents I had been keeping hidden at him. With tears streaming down my face more out of anger and frustration than sadness or regret, I packed my belongings. But I was determined not to let him get away with this. With that resolve, I left the house I had called home for 40 years. My name is Sarah. I'm a 65-year-old homemaker. Next year would have marked 40 years of marriage to my husband, Mike, who is 2 years younger than me. Mike and I had met at work and fallen in love. He was my colleague. As we pushed each other to be better, Mike seemed to develop feelings for me. We started dating and eventually got married. At the same time, I quit my job. Since I had married, I moved in with Mike's family, my father-in-law, mother-in-law, grandparents-in-law, and Mike's sister, Emma. Living with others was not easy. Everyone was kind to me, but I often had to be considerate, and just living there was exhausting. During those times, my mother-in-law, Kate, was always on my side. She had also married the family, just like me.
Why don't you go back to your parents' house and take a break sometimes?
She would say, giving me money for transportation and free time. There were tough times, but she was always incredibly kind to me. 40 years passed. Emma got married and moved far away, and my eldest daughter Mary and eldest son Joe were born. Time flew by in a flurry of events, from seeing off my grandparents-in-law, father-in-law, and my own parents. I had thought that as I got older, life would become more peaceful, but it seems that it's not that simple. The reason for that probably goes back about 10 years. One time, Mike had to go on a business trip for about a week, and he asked me to prepare for it. When I came home after finishing the shopping, I found Kate collapsed in the living room.
Kate!
I rushed to her side. I called an ambulance, and she was taken to the hospital. The tests revealed that she had suffered a stroke, which caused her to collapse.
It's a good thing you found her so quickly. Many people die in situations like this, the doctor told me, trying
to comfort me as I lamented that I shouldn't have gone out. Emma, who was far away, thanked me and said the same thing as the doctor. Thanks to that, my regret began to ease a little. But amidst all of this, only Mike was different.
Where did you go, leaving Mom alone at home, Sarah?
Mike shouted at me loudly as soon as he arrived at the hospital. His sharp tone surprised not only me but also the nurses, doctors, and other patients and their families, who all turned around to see what was going on. I'm sorry. I went to buy the things you asked me to get for your business trip, Mike.
Are you trying to say it's my fault? Don't make excuses.
That's not what I meant. Anyway, I'm sorry. Conscious of the eyes around us, I just apologized to Mike.
Mike, please calm down.
She saved Kate's life, the doctor said, soothing Mike and taking him away from me, seeming to explain Kate's condition to him. When Mike returned to me, he didn't shout like before, but he kept a sullen expression on his face the whole time. Sitting next to him, feeling uncomfortable, I gazed at Kate lying in the bed. Even though Kate had just collapsed, Mike went on his business trip. Honestly, I thought it was unbelievable, but having just been yelled at, and not wanting the hassle of stopping him, I didn't complain. And from that day on, I began taking care of Kate's daily needs. At the same time, preparations for her discharge from the hospital became necessary. It seems she won't be able to move her body freely anymore. I think it will be tough to take care of her at home. I reported Kate's condition to Mike, who had returned from his week-long business trip as scheduled, and consulted with him. However, he wasn't listening to my words at all. Even though he had yelled at me so much at the hospital, he acted as if it had nothing to do with him. Oh, that must be tough. So, the doctor suggested that it might be better for her to go to a facility and gave me some pamphlets.
A facility?
Mike finally looked at me when I said those words. Thinking that he would want to see for himself where his mother would be living, I handed him the pamphlets.
My friend's mom is in this one, and it's popular and really nice. This one just opened, so it's really clean.
Today's facilities are like hotels. She would be able to take proper baths, which would be easier than at home, and with the barrier-free design, it would be easier for her to move around. Although it has become a little difficult for her to speak, Kate originally loved to chat, so being surrounded by many staff members would give her opportunities to talk and serve as rehabilitation. I told Mike about this, hoping he would choose a facility.
Which do you think is better, Mike? It seems she'll be hospitalized for a while longer, so I think we have time to decide after visiting them.
What are you talking about? But contrary to my words, Mike furrowed his brow.
Put Mom in a facility? Are you stupid? What is the point of you being at home? What? Don't try to run away from caregiving. You should do it at home, right?
I was shocked. I'm not trying to run away. But there will be times when I have to leave the house to go shopping and stuff, and it's hard for me to take care of her all by myself. I could understand if we hired a helper, but...
A helper? You think we can let a stranger into our home? We'll manage somehow. Anyway, Mom definitely wants to come back home. We're not putting her in a facility.
As soon as Mike stated this clearly, I was gripped by anxiety. I had never provided nursing care before. There was no way I could do it alone. I even consulted with the nurses and the attending physician. Everyone gave a wry smile at Mike's decision that I should provide the care alone without even hiring a helper. The doctor tried to convince Mike to at least hire a helper, but Mike's resolve was firm. And so Kate was discharged from the hospital and returned home. It was a happy occasion, but my anxiety outweighed my joy as I began my life as her caregiver from that day onward. Although I had anticipated it, caregiving turned out to be much more challenging than I had imagined.
If you're going to make Sarah do this, it would be better if I were gone,
Kate said, feeling guilty about making me take care of her, and this became her catchphrase. Even though she couldn't speak well, she was always considerate of me.
Please don't say that. I'm sorry that I'm not good at this and causing you hardship.
I encouraged her, not wanting her to feel responsible. And so, sometimes with the help of Mary and Joe, I did my best to care for Kate. Even seeing the three of us, Mike still seemed to think it had nothing to do with him. Well, what do you know? You can do it. I knew putting her in a facility would have been running away. Mike would say and laugh every time he saw me giving Kate a bath or feeding her. I thought he should do some of it himself, but he always made excuses about being busy and tired from work and stayed away from caregiving. That alone would have been fine.
Hey, the room is a bit messy, isn't it?
He would furrow his brow and mutter complaints on days when I couldn't keep up with the housework due to taking Kate to the hospital and such. Even when I gave a reason, he would say, "You should have Mary do it. You should have Mary do it." On bad days, he would even say,
"I can't sleep in a house like this."
and go out by himself. It was the same with meals. If they weren't prepared, he would go out to eat by himself. I wished he would at least take the children with him, but he never thought about the family. It seemed he always put himself first. One day, when I went to do the laundry and picked up Mike's pants, I found a crumpled piece of paper in his pocket. The previous evening, Mike had gone out as usual, saying,
"There's nothing to eat."
It seemed to be a receipt from a restaurant where he had eaten out. But something about it felt off. It was a receipt from an ordinary hamburger restaurant, but no matter how you looked at it, the bill was for 2 people. Mike always ordered a cheeseburger set there. But in addition to that, the receipt had a veggie burger listed. Furthermore, there was another branch of that hamburger restaurant just a 10-minute drive from our house, without having to go all the way to the next town.
Could it be?
My hands trembled with anger. I wasn't so dense as to overlook this discrepancy. He undoubtedly had another woman. I was convinced of it. That evening, I decided to confront him right away. We still needed money for the children's tuition, and I couldn't just abandon Kate's care. I thought Mike needed to stop his foolishness and repent as soon as possible, as I couldn't easily divorce him.
What is the meaning of this?
I thrust the receipt at Mike. At first, Mike pretended not to know, saying, "I just went out for dinner," but he was at a loss for words at my deduction.
If you apologize now, I'll pretend it never happened. Stop this nonsense right now,
I finally said to Mike, who was reluctant to admit it. Then Mike let out a deep sigh. And he uttered words that made me doubt my ears.
"You're the one who should be apologizing, Sarah. You've been neglecting the housework, and even though you're a housewife, the house is a mess and you can't even make a proper meal."
That's because...
There you go, making excuses. You've lost your charm as a woman, too. If you're going to tell me not to look elsewhere, you need to change first.
Those words pierced my heart deeply. It wasn't as if I was neglecting the housework by choice, and I too wanted to dress up nicely and go out sometimes. However, I was now responsible for Kate's life. I didn't intend to blame my inability on her, but it was unbearably frustrating and sad that Mike had no understanding of the difficulties of caregiving. Mike sneered at me as I was at a loss for words and left the house. I heard the sound of a car engine starting. He was probably going to see that woman again. As I listened to the sound of the car driving away, I quietly wept alone. From then on, a huge wall formed between us. In front of the children, we engaged in the bare minimum of conversation, but when it was just the 2 of us, there was no conversation at all. Rather, we both tried to avoid being alone together. It was a little easier now that I had stopped expecting anything from him. I could remain indifferent even if he didn't come home or if I found any evidence in his clothes. And then, 10 years after Kate's collapse, the long caregiving life came to a sudden end. One morning, she passed away peacefully in her sleep. Caregiving itself was challenging and sometimes caused me headaches, but the reason I was able to persevere was because the person I was caring for was Kate. That's why it was so lonely, and I felt such a sense of loss when she was gone. It's not really comparable, but I was even more heartbroken than when my own mother passed away, and I wept like a child. She had been my emotional support ever since I married into this family.
What are you sad about? Didn't you say caregiving was hard? Trying to look like a good daughter-in-law just now?
Mike said terrible things to me even though his own mother had died.
Dad! You can't say things like that. That's right. Mom really loved Grandma.
The children took my side and spoke up to Mike, but even after hearing their words, he just laughed. Emma, who had rushed over, also grimaced at his behavior. He was to serve as the chief mourner. It was only natural since he was the eldest son. That was his attitude toward us. But in front of the undertaker and the mourners, he somehow managed to fulfill his role as chief mourner, and both the wake and the funeral were completed without incident. And then everything was over, and we returned home. The house without Kate was quiet, and loneliness crept in. As I was thinking about this by myself, Mike spoke to me without a moment's rest. "It's finally over." "Huh?" Feeling like it had been a long time since we had spoken, I turned around to see Mike grinning repulsively. "You're finally free too, Sarah." "Free." "It was hard, but I'm glad I got to spend time with Kate." We were able to talk a lot, too. "You don't need to keep up the good daughter-in-law act here. It's over now anyway." I sensed something off about his words and waited for what he would say next. And the next moment, the words that came out of Mike's mouth were astounding. "So, as of today, we're getting divorced. My mistress said she didn't want to deal with the caregiving of my mom, so I left it all to you." "What?" I was shocked by the sudden mention of divorce and affair. "Affair?" And I managed to squeeze out those words in a strained voice. Mike raised his chin and laughed as if he were bragging in response to my question. "I guess I never introduced you." "I mean, it's an affair, but it's serious. Her name is Anne." "Girlfriend?" I was appalled by his words. It must be the woman I had confronted him about before. They still hadn't broken up? Grinning repulsively as he showed me a photo of his mistress, he probably couldn't even imagine how disgusting he looked. "Fine. Here, divorce papers." I thrust the divorce papers I had been keeping hidden at him. He looked momentarily surprised, but then grinned revoltingly again. "I'm glad you understand quickly." He took the divorce papers, picked up a nearby pen, and quickly filled them out. "Well, I'll file these. Hurry up and get out." Ignoring his words, I shut myself in my room. With tears streaming down my face more out of anger and frustration than sadness or regret, I packed my belongings. But I was determined not to let him get away with this. With that resolve, I left the house I had lived in for 40 years. From that day on, I went to stay with Mary, who was living alone in the next town. Mary had found out I had been kicked out and told me to come to her place. I hesitated, but she said, "There's enough room for you, Mom," so I decided to take her up on the offer for a while. About 3 days had passed, and I was still getting used to this new life, when my mobile phone rang. It was Mike. I had received notice that the divorce papers had been accepted, so it probably wasn't an urgent matter. I set my phone aside and immersed myself in unpacking, but the phone kept ringing, stopping, and ringing again. "How annoying," I said, feeling slightly irritated as I reluctantly answered the phone, only for Mike to yell at me loudly. "Hey! What's going on?" His voice was so loud that I instinctively pulled the phone away from my ear. Once I confirmed his voice had calmed down, I began the conversation. "What's this all of a sudden? There's hardly any balance in my mom's account. What's the meaning of this? Didn't I pay for everything needed for her care? Sarah, where did you put Mom's money?" Behind him, who was screaming in a frenzy, I could also hear a voice telling him to calm down. It seemed he was at the bank. "Don't know. Maybe she took it with her to heaven?" I couldn't help but chuckle at how flustered he sounded, even over the phone. "Are you kidding me? You must have spent it all." Mike raised his voice even louder, becoming more agitated. "No way. I only did as Kate told me." At those words, Mike finally seemed to come to his senses and stopped shouting. "As Mom said." "That's right. Every month, I received an allowance from her as thanks for the caregiving.
Of course, it was a small amount, but if that continued for 10 years, how much do you think it would add up to?
Mike fell silent at my words.
You thought you'd get a fortune and a new wife once she passed away, but too bad, huh?
I said with a laugh. She had always felt guilty about making me provide care and having Mary and Joe help out with it. On top of that, there was no way she didn't know about Mike's verbal abuse and terrible attitude toward me, as we lived in the same house.
I'm sorry my son is like that. Sarah, you're such a wonderful woman.
She would sometimes say that and cry. The one most hurt by his attitude was Kate. That's precisely why I couldn't forgive or accept him.
This is all I can do, but...
Kate would say as she started giving money to me and the children.
I can't accept this.
Even when I refused, Kate would hold out the money, saying,
Please don't say that and just take it.
She probably felt indebted to me for making me provide her care. To put Kate's mind at ease, I decided to accept it as an allowance. Mike did give me money from his salary for caregiving expenses, but it wasn't nearly enough. I used that money she gave me for her care and hospital visits as well. But there was no way I could spend it all, so Kate's thoughtful gesture remained in my and the children's bank accounts. Hearing my words, Mike became furious again.
You did that without my permission? It's Kate's money. It's up to her what she does with it. I'm the heir.
Mike said that as if asserting his rights, but now that there was nothing to inherit, it was meaningless.
Kate's body was impaired, but her will was clear. It was her decision how to use that money. You have no right to intervene.
I repeated that many times, but he wouldn't accept it. In the end, he even suggested involving lawyers to discuss it. It was a hassle, but I reluctantly agreed. I had originally planned to do that anyway. A few days later, I received a call from a lawyer.
According to Mike, you stole his mother's money. Is that correct?
I was momentarily stunned by the sudden call. I couldn't believe he had actually said such a thing.
Let's meet and talk,
I said, arranging a date and time with the lawyer for a consultation. On the agreed-upon day, I brought Kate's and my debit card statements. I also got statements from Joe and Mary, and brought everything I could, including household account books, to the meeting. I arrived at the law office and went inside. There I was surprised once again.
Oh, you're here.
There was Mike, sitting arrogantly on the sofa. Next to him was a middle-aged woman. She was probably his mistress. I gave a small greeting and sat in the chair the lawyer showed me to.
Stealing your mother-in-law's money is a serious matter. You should be grateful they aren't filing charges against you,
the lawyer said to me with a sigh, apparently still deceived by Mike. I placed all the debit card statements and such that I had brought in front of the lawyer.
I haven't stolen anything. You're being deceived by those people.
This time, the lawyer was surprised by my words. I began explaining in front of the three of them, showing the debit card statements and household account books. The things I had purchased with the money I received and the amounts. The balance had indeed been deposited into my account, but it was a paltry sum.
In the first place, Mike never even took care of his mother. Isn't it terrible for him to try to take the money when he didn't do anything?
Mike and were still laughing at my desperate appeal.
Don't lie.
That's right.
Mike was always consulting with me about how his wife wouldn't provide care. Even though I'm saying this,
I was at a loss for words. The lawyer was also completely believing Mike and the others. The lawyer's gaze toward me was cold. But I didn't give up.
Fine. Then let's ask Emma,
I said, bringing up that name as if it were my last resort.
It would be best if we could ask Kate in heaven, but since we can't. Emma?
The lawyer tilted his head. My sister. Mike explained to the lawyer. Emma was Mike's real sister. She was one of the heirs and could potentially be disadvantageous for me. I was saying we should ask her. The lawyer probably thought it strange that I would deliberately ask someone who could possibly corner me. Mike laughed. But isn't Emma busy right now? If you really insist, I guess we could try asking her.
I'll do what I can rather than keep quiet and go along with what Mike says. If even Emma is going to treat me like the bad guy, then I guess I'm in the wrong.
I called Emma. It was a gamble, but I had a good chance of winning.
Sarah, what's going on?
Emma answered the phone right away. The lawyer explained the situation on my behalf. After listening silently over the speakerphone, Emma let out a big sigh when the story ended. As soon as that sigh finished, Mike began to speak in a triumphant voice.
You must be frustrated too, Emma. Mom's money was stolen. That money should have been something you could inherit too.
The lawyer stared at the mobile phone with a serious expression. But at the sound of Emma's voice from the other end, Mike froze.
Mike, what are you saying? Do you know how grateful Mom was to Sarah? Stop trying to meddle with how Mom chose to use her money in the end. It's shameful,
Emma said, uttering words similar to what I had once said to him. Mike, who never expected to hear such a thing, began to panic.
Even so. Besides, I received money from the life insurance. That's enough for me.
But he was surprised by Emma's words.
Life insurance? I haven't heard anything about that.
Oh, I don't think there's any for you, Mike. Mom said she didn't want to give anything to the jerk who made Sarah suffer.
What?
My prediction was spot on. Emma had taken my side. Upon hearing the shocking truth, his face turned bright red, and he held his head in his hands. He slammed his fist on the desk once. He must have been unbearably frustrated. Unaware of what was happening on our end, Emma continued.
Everything Mike said is a lie. Mom actually said she wanted to leave money for Sarah. That's why I suggested giving it to her as living expenses and an allowance.
I see.
But Sarah is too kind. She said that wouldn't be right and told Mom to at least make me the beneficiary of her life insurance.
I smiled at her words. I hadn't intended to hold it over her, but as long as this fact remained, I was convinced Emma wouldn't do anything to trap me. It was also due to her personality, which is why I was able to confidently ask to hear from her.
Basically, Mike was too busy fooling around with his mistress and dumped the caregiving on Sarah. He's really the worst.
When she started talking like that, Mike lifted his face. Then, with his face still bright red, he frantically reached for his mobile phone and ended the call, even though the conversation was still ongoing. He laughed as if to brush it off. After hearing everything, the lawyer shifted his sharp gaze from me to Mike.
It seems I was deceived. What you told me was apparently a lie. No, well,
the lawyer said to Mike in exasperation. Mike's face was bright red, and he was flustered. It seemed he couldn't even get the words out. Seizing the lull in the conversation, I spoke up.
Oh yes. Speaking of money, I haven't received any compensation from these people for the affair. Can I file a claim for that now?
I immediately asked the lawyer. At that, Anne, who had been sitting there looking bored, suddenly lifted her face.
What?
Oh, the affair.
Yes, of course you can. And we never did a division of assets, did we? How lucky that we can take care of it all at once. Thank you for calling me here,
I said with a big smile to the two of them, who had desperate expressions on their faces.
What are we going to do? I can't believe this is happening. I didn't expect this either. It's all because you said to ask a lawyer, Anne.
The two of them started arguing next to the lawyer. The lawyer hurried to stop them, but I just watched and laughed.
Not only are we not getting the money, but it's being taken from us. How could you do this to me?
Please calm down.
I'm sorry. This is all Sarah's fault for things turning out like this.
Their argument was heating up, and I was about to get caught in the crossfire, but I quickly stood up. Well then, I'll be in touch later about the claim. Yes. Thank you very much for coming all the way here today. And I left before getting dragged into their fight. A few days later, I consulted with the lawyer again and made arrangements to claim compensation from them. The lawyer seemed to feel responsible for summoning me based on the jerk's story, but he would handle things properly to make up for it.
Please don't apologize. I'm counting on you.
Leave it to me. True to his word, the compensation was properly transferred from the two of them. I never thought those two would actually pay up, but the lawyer must have worked hard. I finally felt at ease, thinking it was over. Apparently, the two of them are living in my former home now. I felt a little sad that Mike and End had taken the house where I had made memories with Kate and the children, but originally, when my father-in-law passed away, the ownership of the house had been transferred to him. It couldn't be helped. A year later, I cut ties with him, and although the children occasionally received contact from him, they ignored it. Everyone in the family, including Emma, had learned what Mike had done and cut ties with him, but then Mary received a certain call related to him. Dad's been hospitalized. The call was from the hospital, but... Mary said to me, looking troubled. Why would they contact Mary when he should have his new wife, Anne? I didn't know what had happened, but maybe it was something really serious. They said they wanted us to come, so I contacted Joe and accompanied them to the hospital. As soon as we arrived at the hospital, we were shown the way. A woman was sitting in front of the hospital room. It was Anne. When Anne noticed we had come, she lifted her face, approached me, and said,
I'm giving that old man back to you. What? I'm telling you, I don't want to take care of him. If I had known he would need care just a year after getting married, I never would have married him.
She raged as if she had lost her mind. Having just arrived, we had no idea what was going on and looked at each other. A doctor who heard the commotion rushed over to us and explained Mike's condition to Mary and Joe. Apparently, years of unhealthy living had caught up with him, and he had developed diabetes. It was pointed out every year at his health checkups, but he completely ignored it. When he couldn't bear the pain in his feet any longer and came to the hospital, they said they had no choice but to amputate. He had already been eating out and drinking with and instead of having meals at home, and he probably continued that lifestyle even after getting married. He was no longer young, yet he ignored the results of his health checkups. There was no one to blame but himself. It seems he's going to be bedridden and need care, but his current wife doesn't want to do it. Mary relayed to us what she had heard from the doctor. I see. That must be why Anne had confronted me so strongly earlier. But to me, he was already a stranger. The three of us could only be appalled. So, I don't know. She said to put him in a facility or something. Mary and Joe said with a laugh. It might be terrible to laugh at a sick person, but we couldn't bring ourselves to feel any sympathy for them. I thought it would be good for him to experience being the one needing care and understand a little of how Kate felt, and should learn how difficult it is too.
Since the three of us are here, why don't we go eat before heading home? Sounds good.
Perhaps overhearing our carefree conversation, I could see Anne glaring at us. But I didn't react to her gaze. What kind of life the two of them would lead from now on had nothing to do with us. In the end, Mike ended up in a facility. Because of that, it seems they sold the house. And lives in a small apartment and apparently only visits the facility to exchange laundry. A family member of Mary's coworker is in the same facility as Mike, but no one comes to see him, and he makes unreasonable demands of the staff as much as he pleases, so he's apparently disliked within the facility too. That doesn't mean I'll give him special treatment, but I can only be appalled that he's still the same even after becoming ill. Although I feel a little sorry for him being abandoned by Anne, the wife he chose over his family, no matter how you look at it, I can only think that his own actions brought this upon himself. Sometime later, Joe was getting married. He said he was buying a new house and asked if I wanted to live together. Until now, I had been staying with Mary. She did say,
"You can do whatever you like."
But I couldn't keep imposing on Mary forever. I told Joe I would pay half the cost of the new house and asked to live with him. "You don't need to pay for the new house. It's not that expensive since it's just a renovated used home," Joe said. When he showed me the house, I couldn't help but shed tears. It was the very house where I had spent time with the children and Kate. I found out this place was for sale and bought it. "I thought you'd be happy, Mom." I was moved by his kindness in doing this without telling me. Moreover, while preserving Kate's warmth, the kitchen, bedroom, and bathroom had all been redone.
"It's a lovely house,"
I murmured, and even though we were inside, a small breeze blew. Kate was smiling at us. Somehow, I felt that. Starting today, a new life would begin here once more. I believe Kate will surely be watching over our happiness from now on.
"You worthless piece of crap. I told you not to call me at work unless it's urgent."
Robert's irritated voice shouted through the phone, making me hold my breath for a moment. He was currently away on a business trip. As a busy salesman, he had repeatedly stressed to me how crucial this job was and that I should never disturb him under any circumstances. That's why I wouldn't repeatedly contact him unless it was truly necessary. After calling over and over, his first words when he finally picked up were so harsh. Without even listening, he immediately dismissed it as unimportant, filling me with a rage that made my head feel like it was about to boil over.
"It is important. Actually, Melissa is dash." "Shut up. If Mom needs to reach me, she'll contact me directly. The fact that you're the one calling means it's nothing significant. This is ridiculous. I'm hanging up. God, this is why women have such terrible timing."
Robert deliberately cut me off with his loud voice, grumbling complaints as he ended the call. I let out a deep breath I had unconsciously been holding in. Still, my heart was far from calm. Gripping my smartphone tightly, I took deep breath after deep breath, finally managing to compose myself a little.
"Does he not know the saying, 'Don't speak ill of the dead'?"
My name is Jessica. I'm a 32-year-old freelance web designer. In my 20s, I worked my butt off at a company, slowly climbing the ranks until I could finally go independent. Now I work from home while living with my husband Robert. I met Robert through a client I had been working with. We hit it off, dated without any issues, and eventually got married. During our courtship, Robert was a gentle and kind man. But as soon as we tied the knot, his attitude rapidly turned cold. Even when I tried to make time for us to talk, he would just say, "I'm tired," while blankly staring at the TV, ignoring me. On days when he was in a bad mood, he'd make snide remarks like, "Must be nice for you, lazily working from home. When you go into an office, you have to worry about your boss and clients no matter how much you hate it. I'm so jealous of you. Since you have it so easy, the least you could do is make some more elaborate meals." It's true that working from home means less human drama and allows me to focus on my job in peace. But since I only get paid based on output, there's no stability. I'm constantly anxious and under pressure. It's really tough. The atmosphere between us was getting worse by the day. I was growing increasingly worried about our future. Even so, there was a time when we had considered having a child. I had hoped that becoming a father would instill a sense of responsibility in Robert and make him a bit more gentle. I also wanted to finish having kids before I got too much older. But that dream never came to fruition. I did manage to get pregnant once. We were overjoyed at the time, but I miscarried before even reaching the 6-month mark. The pain from that experience is something I still can't forget. The guilt of not being able to bring the baby in my belly into this world. Even if it was just a fetus, the overwhelming grief of losing our precious child's life was unbearable. During that time, I couldn't focus on work at all and spent every day crying in despair. Guess it was so uncomfortable inside your womb that it figured it was better off dead. Robert had said mockingly, looking down on me as I lay in bed, not showing an ounce of concern or care.
So we have to start all over again from conception? What a pain. Can you even still get pregnant at your age?
His words, devoid of any sensitivity, cut into me, wounding my heart even further. The one who saved me from hitting rock bottom was my mother-in-law, Melissa. Ever since we got married, I had a good relationship with her. She would come visit our home and we would exchange messages. We'd share recommended recipes and beauty products, building a friendship despite needing to be somewhat reserved. When Melissa found out about my miscarriage, she grieved and comforted me as if it had happened to her. One time, Robert spat out the cruel words.
Such a defective product you are. Can't even properly give birth despite being a woman, right in front of Melissa.
She flew into a rage. Grabbing him by the collar, she said,
Robert, how could you? Sit down right there. I can't believe you'd blame the miscarriage on Jessica. She did nothing wrong. Sometimes these things just happen on a whim of God's will. To think you'd grow up to have such a twisted personality and way of speaking without even learning about this. I don't remember raising a son like you.
She gave him a thorough scolding. Seeing that, when his attitude had been wearing down my spirit, somehow made me feel a bit lighter. And for Melissa, who had protected me, I felt a surge of gratitude and affection from the bottom of my heart. When Robert wasn't around, she confided in me that she had also experienced a miscarriage. It had happened to a baby she conceived before Robert. I was certain there was a baby in here, but I couldn't bring it into the world. I was so sad and frustrated, I blamed myself too. Medical knowledge wasn't as advanced back then, and the causes weren't clear. They even told me there was a real possibility it was the mother's body's fault. My mother-in-law harshly criticized me for it. I wanted to tell you from my heart that it wasn't your fault. Melissa's words as she held my hand were painful to hear, making my chest tighten. If my body couldn't give birth, I thought about dying together with my lost baby so many times.
Melissa, don't say that.
I responded. When I blurted that out, Melissa smiled.
It's okay. I'm still here living now, and after that I had Robert and 2 more children. So it's all right. I'm sure you'll be able to give birth to your next baby. But it's painful right now, isn't it? You can let your guard down with me. Even if it's just to chat and take your mind off things for a bit, that's fine. It's been a few years since my husband passed away, so I have all the time in the world. Reach out to me anytime.
Those warm, loving words made my eyes well up. Before I knew it, I was clinging to Melissa, tears streaming down my face. After that incident, my bond with her deepened. We became connected by a powerful tie, like a real family, maybe even stronger. However, Robert remained the same as ever. Even when I recovered and was able to do my job and housework like before, his cold attitude persisted. He stopped hurling verbal abuse, but we never had any pleasant conversations either. The only words he uttered at home were things like,
I'm tired. Is dinner not ready?
As he came home and tossed his jacket on the couch. Or,
I have a business dinner with a client the day after tomorrow, so prepare some kind of gift.
While leaving his finished dishes lying around without cleaning up. It was as if he treated me like a servant. Other than that, he mostly ignored me, acting like I was invisible. I wondered if there was any meaning to this completely frigid married life. On the other hand, my relationship with Melissa continued. In addition to exchanging messages, we would meet up a few times a month to have coffee or go shopping together. It was precisely because I had a good relationship with Melissa that I was afraid of confiding in her, getting divorced, and then losing that connection. Robert started putting even less money into our household. Despite working in sales and supposedly earning money, all he contributed was the bare minimum for living expenses.
You're earning money too, so this should be enough to get by, right?
He unilaterally decided, not even giving me room to discuss it. It felt like he was saying, I'm giving you money, so don't complain. There were no sudden flashy changes in his belongings or clothes. I never suspected infidelity, like finding lipstick on his shirts. He just kept saying work was getting busy, that he had more difficult clients, and his business trips and overnight stays increased. I wondered, does he dislike being at home that much? If he's going to treat me like I don't exist, why doesn't Robert bring up divorce? A few months passed and I got used to living frugally. All my efforts in housework and my job started to be recognized, and I began getting even more work than before. The rates from my longtime clients went up, and I got a steady stream of new projects through referrals. As I got busier, my career really took off. Naturally, my earnings increased too. I felt a bit relieved, thinking that if I could keep working at this pace, I might be able to save up some money despite Robert's meager contributions. It happened one day.
What, another business trip? Didn't you just go on one last week?
I was shocked when Robert, who had only left for a trip a few days ago, said he was going away again for 2 nights and 3 days. Wasn't this way too frequent? Business trips are normal for a salesman, but I hadn't heard anything about him changing departments since we got married. Such a sudden, drastic change in his work environment seemed unnatural.
I already told you. I have this annoying client who keeps calling me out to rural areas. Unlike you, who just exchanges messages online, I earn my money by pounding the pavement.
He snapped at me, then tossed an empty suitcase in front of me, telling me to pack his things if I understood. Why do I have to do this? That thought crushed my heart as I silently stared down at the suitcase. Paying no attention to me, he ate his dinner and took a shower as he pleased before going to sleep. Even when I approached the bed, he was snoring loudly, showing no signs of waking up. His smartphone lay right in front of me. If I used his fingerprint to unlock it, I could easily peek inside. But if I found decisive evidence, it would surely lead to divorce. Then I'd have no choice but to explain it to Melissa. If we got divorced, I didn't think we could continue our relationship like before. But maybe, even if I confessed to Melissa, she might scold Robert, saying this is my son's fault, and we could remain friends, not as mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. As I picked up Robert's smartphone to bring it close to his finger, the screen suddenly lit up. A large notification from a messaging app displayed a clearly feminine name.
Can't wait for our weekend trip. Last week was shopping, so this time let's relax and get cozy at AL Hotel.
Strangely, no anger welled up in me. If anything, I almost felt joy at having obtained evidence to claim compensation from Robert and this woman. Seizing the chance while he was in a deep, drunken sleep, I unlocked Robert's smartphone and opened the messaging app. I quickly took photos of the screen with my own smartphone and slowly scrolled. I captured a video of all their message exchanges, seemingly from when they first started their affair. There were even naked photos taken on a bed. I had to fight to keep my hands from shaking. Then I scrutinized whether Robert's overnight stays were really for business or to meet this woman. Apparently not everything was a lie. It seemed he actually went on real business trips once in a while. Even after all this, Robert showed no signs of waking up. Gathering the evidence was so easy it gave me goosebumps. It was so sloppily managed, as if he had no intention of hiding the affair, that it made my head spin. The next morning, Robert showed no sense that anything was amiss. As usual, he sat waiting for breakfast to be served, complained about the seasoning, looked down on my work, and grumbled about how tough he had it. Even as I watched his back leaving through the front door, my heart remained strangely calm. I even had the presence of mind to wonder if I should look for a lawyer. Perhaps because I had stopped saying anything, Robert seemed to be in a slightly better mood. When the weekend arrived, he unusually said,
"I'm off,"
before leaving for his business trip, no, his adultery trip. As I was tidying up around the house and debating whether to go grocery shopping for dinner, my smartphone rang from an unexpected caller. Robert has one younger brother and one younger sister. The call was from my brother-in-law, Kevin. Kevin is also married, but I heard he lives with his parents to save up for a house.
Hello?
When I answered, I heard a voice that sounded more dejected than when we last met. Jessica. I'm sorry for the sudden call. Actually, our mother, she suddenly passed away.
What? No way, there must be some mistake.
I let out a scream-like voice. Images of Melissa, who I had spent so much time with, flashed through my mind. Her smile when we enjoyed coffee together. Her serious expression when she was there to listen. And her warm demeanor as she supported me when I was hurting from the miscarriage. The sudden news that she had left this world felt like a stab to my heart. It's true. This morning, she suddenly collapsed. We called an ambulance right away, but she was already. I'm sorry, is Robert there? I tried contacting him but couldn't get through. I hesitated for a moment when asked. I was overcome by the urge to spill everything to Kevin right then and there, but now wasn't the time. Somehow, I restrained myself, knowing this wasn't what I should be telling him now.
I'm sorry, he's not here right now. He said he's on a business trip. I'm sure you have a lot to deal with too. Should I tell him for you?
I understand. Then could I ask you to do that? Honestly, there's so much to do, I can't even make phone calls. After that, I expressed my condolences to Kevin again and told him I would come help if he needed anything before ending the call. Then I immediately tried to contact Robert. Amidst the intense pain in my chest from losing Melissa, who I was so close with, I felt irritated at Robert for not answering the phone. When he finally picked up after over 10 rings, Robert's voice was clearly displeased.
Hello? You finally answered. Actually, Melissa is...
As I tried to speak, Robert cut me off, saying,
Huh? What about Mom? I told you I'm on a business trip. Don't call me about stupid things.
For a moment, I stopped breathing. He was annoyed that his wife called him in the middle of his adultery trip. Realizing that made my head burn with anger.
Come back right now. Melissa collapsed this morning. Shut up.
I spoke in a strong tone, feeling I had to tell him no matter what, but it must have really gotten on his nerves because Robert yelled over me.
If it was really important, Mom would contact me herself. The fact that she hasn't means it's nothing major. I'm working, don't call me, you shut in.
He ranted on in an intense voice, then hung up on me unilaterally. I stood there stunned, my hand shaking as I held my smartphone, shocked and confused. He wouldn't even listen, even though it was about his own mother. No matter how many times I called, I couldn't get through. Eventually, an announcement played saying the phone was turned off or out of range. It's hopeless. I took a deep breath. If he hates talking to me that much, if he's telling me not to call, then I'll obey. He said it himself, so he has no right to complain later. I left a note on the dining room table that simply read, I'm going to your parents' house, quickly packed my things, and left. I arrived at my in-laws' house in the evening. In the midst of the chaos, Kevin and Alice greeted me. On the living room table was a list of things the remaining family members needed to do, with documents scattered about. I'm sorry. We still have so many calls to make and things to take care of. We haven't had a chance to clean up yet. No, I'm the one who should apologize for coming alone at a time like this. It's okay, but what did Robert say? Is he coming later? Kevin, who had assumed we would come together, furrowed his brow suspiciously at the sight of me alone. Alice also looked outside with a puzzled expression, checking if Robert's car was there. I felt guilty. Mustering my courage, I told them about my phone call with Robert a few hours ago. A painfully heavy silence fell, and Alice was the first to speak up.
Unbelievable!
Alice was the first to raise her voice.
I can't believe him. What is he thinking?
She was probably trying to contain her anger. Alice's face turned bright red as she clenched her fists tightly, making them tremble.
That idiot, is it okay to contact him now?
Kevin muttered in a terrifyingly low voice. Looking closely at the memo Kevin was holding, I saw the name of a funeral home and the number of people they wanted to invite. Next to the word chief mourner, the characters for eldest son were written, along with Robert's name. Perhaps noticing my gaze, Kevin let go of the memo. I'm sorry, the funeral home told me the eldest son usually acts as the chief mourner, so I told them Robert would do it. I'll try contacting the funeral home. Right, we need to let them know as soon as we figured it out. Kevin immediately called the funeral home and changed the chief mourner to himself. They let me stay over that night. The next morning, Kevin hurriedly left to file the death certificate and other paperwork. I put all my effort into informing relatives who I couldn't reach yesterday about Melissa's passing and preparing for the wake. When the wake began, many people came to see Melissa despite the short notice. Each time, they asked why Robert wasn't there. I explained that he was away on an unavoidable business trip. Some were appalled, others angry. A few even tried contacting Robert on the spot. However, Robert must have kept his phone off because he didn't respond to anyone. The next day, after a tumultuous night, I collapsed into bed. The funeral started, and I managed to see Melissa off. But when it came time to say our final goodbyes, I couldn't hold back my tears at Melissa's serene expression. I wept openly, embracing Alice as we mourned the loss of Melissa.
Not many daughter-in-law are this close with their mother-in-law. I'm sure Mom was happy to have gotten along so well with you, Jessica.
Kevin comforted me with those words. The three of us returned to my in-laws' house, sharing memories of Melissa and shedding tears together. In the end, there was no contact from Robert. From the next day onward, we spent a hectic few days paying for the funeral expenses and entertaining Melissa's friends who visited the house. 3 days flew by. Then, the front door of my in-laws' house was roughly flung open. Heavy footsteps resounded as Robert barged into the living room.
How long are you gonna mooch off other people's homes, you shut-in? Abandoning our house, what the hell were you doing?
The moment he saw me, Robert started yelling. Then he noticed Kevin and Alice with me and raised his eyebrows. Seemingly calming down for a second, he looked around, appearing puzzled by the thoroughly cleaned-up living room.
What guests? More importantly, where's Mom? I'm thirsty.
At those words, Alice quietly stood up. But Kevin was faster. He dashed right up to Robert and swung his right fist straight at Robert's face. Robert let out a scream as he fell backward with a loud thud. Kevin straddled him and grabbed Robert by the collar.
Mom is dead. The wake and funeral are already over. How dare you show your face now?
The image of the calm and polite Kevin was instantly shattered. His face bright red, he shouted with enough force to send spit flying. Robert wore a dumbfounded expression, as if forgetting the pain in his cheek. Gradually, the meaning of the words seemed to sink in. His face turned just as red with anger as his, and he yelled back.
I never heard about that. Why didn't anyone tell me something so important? We did contact you. Me, Alice, and Jessica. You must have gotten dozens of calls from relatives too.
At Kevin's retort, Robert choked on his words and averted his gaze. I don't know when Robert turned his phone back on, but the total number of calls about Melissa's passing easily exceeded 50. It was probably hard for him to pretend he hadn't seen or heard about it. Still, unwilling to admit his own fault, he glared at me.
It's your fault for not getting to the point. If you had properly told me about Mom, I would have apologized to my client and come straight home.
You didn't even try to listen, did you? Alice's icy voice drowned out Robert's angry shout. In contrast to Kevin, who was still trembling with rage, Alice glared up at Robert without even trying to hide her disdain.
You guys! Don't you think she might be lying?
That's impossible. I have a recording of that call. Want to hear it? When I showed my smartphone, his eyes went wide. I actually have all my phone calls automatically recorded. Unlike meetings on the computer, calls that come in on my smartphone often involve minor revisions or additions. Because they're so easily conveyed, pointless disputes about who said what tend to happen later. It's a handy feature for keeping track of pushy salespeople and who they are. I use it all the time. Naturally, my conversation with Robert was recorded too. I had already let Kevin and Alice listen to it. Robert's eyes widened as he glared up at us.
Also, Robert, you're lying. I checked with your company. They said there's no business trip right now. Apparently, you've been taking consecutive vacation days. You investigated me at my workplace?
Indeed. Alice, who works at the same company as Robert, had grown suspicious of him and asked his department to look into it.
Well, of course I'd be worried and curious if you were too busy to even attend your own mother's funeral. Or what, do you have something to hide?
Kevin, who had been silent until now, looked up with a pale face and a grave expression.
Hey, what have you been doing while taking all those vacation days?
Robert loudly and brazenly insisted.
Work, obviously. Sometimes I have to take time off for business dinners with clients. You guys wouldn't understand.
As Robert shouted, I turned on my smartphone. It contained the evidence of his infidelity that I had previously gathered.
A trip with your mistress, right?
I said, showing my smartphone to Kevin and Alice.
Hey, what are you talking about? Don't make baseless accusations.
Ignoring Robert's flustered yelling, I showed them images of his message exchanges with the woman, receipts from brand name stores where he likely bought her gifts. There was even a photo of the two of them with their arms linked. Anyone could understand the situation from this. Of course, I was also able to show them screenshots of messages they had exchanged right before this latest trip.
What the hell? I can't believe this. Neglecting mom for a trip with this woman, are you out of your mind? And what's with these messages? They're so sickly sweet it's gross.
Alice immediately expressed her disgust. Kevin turned a ghastly pale face towards Robert, seemingly unable to process the situation.
Not just the trip. This is a betrayal of Jessica. And buying so many expensive gifts for your mistress is a huge blow to your household finances.
For Kevin, who is trying hard to save money right now, financial issues must hit close to home. The fact that Robert had been spending lavishly on his mistress while barely contributing to their household was unforgivable to him.
Wait a second. What are you looking at?
Robert, now furious, snatched the smartphone from us. He looked at the contents and then bore down on me with an intensity that suggested he might grab me at any moment.
When did you get this? You snooped through my private messages with my girlfriend?
After Kevin managed to restrain Robert's hands as he roughly grabbed my clothes, Robert violently threw my smartphone on the floor, as if venting his frustration. The loud noise reverberated painfully through the tense room.
It's not like I wanted to do this. But you were clearly suspicious. Unnaturally frequent business trips, never coming home. Barely contributing any of your earnings to the household. Nothing but thoughtless words towards me. I knew something was up.
I retorted, picking up my smartphone.
Then by chance, I saw a message from your mistress. I easily found tons of other evidence in the bedroom too. You were so bad at hiding it, I was appalled despite being the one cheated on.
At that, Robert exploded with rage.
Shut up with your nagging! When a man has a wife and family, achieves results at work and earns money, women naturally flock to him. In a man's world, that factors into your reputation. What? Would you rather have a husband who can't attract people and can't get ahead?
Hearing that, I instinctively hung my head. Not because I was hurt. It was such an absurdly shameless excuse that I couldn't help but laugh. Somehow, I put on a straight face. After taking a deep breath, I yelled a verbal blow at him.
You can only say that after you properly cherish your family. You have no right to talk about being a good husband. Don't ever come back to our house again.
Well, in the end, Kevin and Alice promptly declared they were cutting ties with Robert. Treating his spouse like trash and cheating, then getting furious without any remorse, plus his heartless attitude about his mother's death for those two, it was more than enough reason to stop being family. I cleared out all of his belongings from our home and started a comfortable life living alone. And of course, to properly deal with his infidelity, I consulted a lawyer about compensation. Shockingly, his mistress was a woman from one of his company's business partners. When Alice asked around the company after seeing the evidence photos I had already gathered, she was quickly identified.
This is so terrible, it makes me sick. That woman is awful too. I'll have to reconsider our relationship with them.
Alice said that while sharing the information about the mistress she had found on social media with me. Sometime after the compensation amount was decided and I sent Robert the official notice. He started contacting me repeatedly on my smartphone. Things like,
"Give me a break. Those two kicked me out of my family home too, so I had no choice but to rent a cheap apartment. You think I can live like this?
And
That compensation amount is absurd. You're the one who snooped through my private life, right? You're making it sound like I'm the only one at fault.
even now, Robert was still complaining to me without understanding his own wrongdoings. I was dumbfounded as I blocked his number. Then a few days later, he started barging into my house directly. When I opened the front door thinking it was someone else, there stood Robert, looking much more unkempt than before.
Why are you here? I told you to never come back to this house.
When I coldly rebuffed him, he put on an unpleasant grin and said, "Fine, I get it. I won't come inside. But at least do something about the money. The compensation is way too high. I barely have enough to get by. I can't even buy a new suit. It's a huge problem for a top salesman like me. Come on, you can at least do that much, right?" The nerve of him, shamelessly trying to mooch money off me like that.
Why don't you go ask that woman you traveled with to support you instead?
When I said that snidely, Robert bit his lip in vexation, furrowing his brow.
It's because you demanded such a huge compensation that we ended up breaking up.
I see, so basically, her boyfriend went from being loaded to being poor, and that's why she dumped him. It seems he had been lavishing her with expensive branded goods and frequently taking her on extravagant trips. So that woman was just as terrible, only seeing Robert for his money. I retorted.
Is that so? But you're someone who's valued at work, earning a good living. Unlike me, you're an admirable person thriving in a company. In that case, take care of yourself. Well then, goodbye.
With that, I slammed the front door shut. Then I promptly contacted my lawyer. Before long, Robert was slapped with a restraining order against contacting me. He had truly squandered all his earnings on his mistress and wanton spending. On top of that, because he had completely left all household matters to me, he lacked any life skills. Now living in an apartment, he could barely manage household chores and was leading a desolate life. His unkempt appearance when he barged into my house was the result of his lack of ability to take care of himself. There was no way he could manage as a salesman like that. Not only did he look a mess, he couldn't even cook. Subsisting on junk food day after day, his health deteriorated. He became unable to work, and a few months later, I heard he was fired from the company. I learned about this from Alice, who works at the same company. Naturally, Robert couldn't find a good new job. He struck out on every attempt to transition to a full-time position. But he needed to get his life back on track and pay the compensation. A few months later, Alice told me she had seen him looking pale, working a part-time job directing traffic on a road she passed during a business trip. After constantly looking down on others and persisting in his selfish behavior, Robert ended up stuck in a low-paying part-time job with no freedom. As for his mistress, it seems her parents were furious at her for having a relationship with a married man and indulging in a lavish lifestyle. All the shopping and trips she had enjoyed to the fullest were now forbidden. Under her parents' strict supervision, she was forced to take an unwanted job. She's now working every day under tremendous stress, suffocated by a life with zero freedom in both her professional and private life. After that, I combined my savings up until then with the compensation money and promptly moved to a new place. The condominium I had been living in was a place I had shared with Robert. Just residing there brought back unpleasant memories. I wanted to get away from there as quickly as possible. I was still steadily taking on more and more projects at work, building a solid track record while earning the trust of multiple clients. A fulfilling life dedicated to my work, living on my own. I made a fresh start in my new life. A few months later, I began dating a man I met at a cafe I had started frequenting in my new town. He works in product planning and development at a major corporation. He was very interested in and respected my work as a web designer. And I was drawn to his calm demeanor and logical, level-headed personality. I'm sure he would never cheat or betray and abandon his family. A few years later, I married him, and we were blessed with a child. This time, no dangerous situations arose, and our baby is growing healthily in my belly. My new husband is very considerate of me during my pregnancy, which has been a huge help. Right now, the two of us are eagerly awaiting the birth of our child while advancing our careers and preparing for the delivery. A kind husband and a new family member on the way. A loving, peaceful home awaits me.
I'd love to see your envious face, but I'm not that cruel, so I'll let it be. It'd probably be awkward for you to see me, so why don't you hide in the bathroom or something? She laughed noisily over the phone, mocking me. I detest this woman more than anyone in the world, no, in the universe. 13 years ago, she stole my husband from me. I'd like to cut ties, but that's definitely difficult to do, because sadly, this woman is my biological sister. I held the phone to my ear after a while, and let out a small chuckle after she hung up on me. My name is Ruth, a 37-year-old divorcee. My marriage fell apart in just 6 months, and it's all because of my villainous sister. I have an identical twin sister named Rachel. Even our longtime friends mistake us for each other because we look so much alike. However, contrary to our appearance, our personalities are completely different. I'm more of the quiet type, while Rachel is active and tends to take charge of things. I was the better one in academics, while Rachel excelled in sports. Rachel's the type who blurts out whatever she's thinking. How can you wear such unstylish clothes? People are going to think I'm not stylish either since we're twins. That'll suck. As you can see, we don't get along. It wouldn't be so bad if it was just at home, but Rachel always brought trouble. Back in our school days, I often got harassed by girls from other schools on my way home. Hey, stop hitting on my boyfriend! Of course, I didn't even know them. Not again, Rachel. Whenever Rachel found someone she was interested in, she wouldn't hesitate to snatch him away, even if he already had a girlfriend. I blame the guys too, but Rachel was worse. And I, being mistaken for her, am a victim too. Moreover, she seems to lose interest once she gets the guy, sometimes breaking up in as short as a week. It's unbelievable. Rachel, you need to stop this nonsense. Have you ever thought about how the other girls feel, and that I'm also suffering too? To my words, she responded, an unattractive woman's jealousy is scary. Anyway, your guy, John, right? He's so dull. I doubt he'll cheat on you. Don't worry, I have no interest in him. He's not hot at all. And talked down on my boyfriend. This man named John is the despicable ex-husband who dumped me without a second thought 13 years ago. We got close because we went to the same tutoring center. He was rather quiet and made me feel at ease. His mother was a fortune teller and was well known for her accurate readings. She even ran a fortune-telling house. We graduated from the same university and decided to get married 2 years later. I had thought I would spend my life with this man, but 6 months after our marriage, my ex-husband, John, placed the divorce papers in front of me and said, "Please divorce me, I can't take it anymore, and I'm sure you know why." Sitting next to him was my sister, Rachel, with a smug look on her face. Taken by surprise, I stammered, "Huh? I'm sorry, I don't understand. Did I do something? I don't remember doing anything wrong." At my words, John banged his fist on the desk and shouted, "Really? How do you have the audacity? You've been cheating on me. Can you still deny it after seeing this?" On the desk were a few pictures showing a man and a woman entering a hotel together. But to me, it looked like I was being shown pictures of my sister Rachel, going into a hotel with some man I didn't know. I didn't understand what my ex-husband was saying at all. The man in the photo must have been just another one of Rachel's flings. No, this is Rachel, it's not me." At that moment, Rachel burst into tears and sobbed, "Ruth, let's stop this. I can't stand lying to John anymore." Then John said to my sister, "Rachel, I'm okay. You're so kind. Thank you." What am I looking at here? John glared at me and started to spew a fabricated story that was simply unimaginable. According to him, I had been cheating, and to avoid being caught, I was constantly borrowing clothes from my sister, spending my spare time at a hotel with my lover, and that I was a terrible woman. John had completely believed this ridiculous story that he'd heard from my sister. "I heard from Rachel that you've always had a bad track record with men. Even when we were dating, you were playing around with several men." I responded to my furious ex-husband, "Are you seriously saying that, John? You've been with me for several years, and you believe a story from my sister, who you've only known for half a year? Are you sane? Are you an idiot? Perhaps he didn't like my calm response because all he could do was glare at me. And to my surprise, Rachel had the nerve to hit on John. You may have the same face, but your personalities are completely different. You're not charming at all. Rachel always listens to my complaints with a smile. She's so patient. I might have married the wrong sister. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Rachel continued to fake her tears, but I could see her grin. Rachel was always a player when it came to men, since she was a student, but ever since she started working, she had changed the type of men she targeted. She now prioritized social status and money over looks, and John, my ex-husband, who worked at a major corporation and came from a moderately wealthy family, was a perfect target. She must have set her eyes on him from the time I introduced him at our wedding. My ex-husband had been completely fooled by my sister's poor acting. I never thought my ex-husband that I'd been with for so long could be this naive, and I could feel my feelings towards him fade away rapidly. You two are despicable. Do as you please, but never show your face in front of me again. I felt tears welling up, but I managed to hold them back. I filled out the divorce papers on the spot and threw them at the two of them. Knowing my cunning sister, she and John probably hadn't started a physical relationship yet. Blaming compensation seems tough. Still, if it meant those two would disappear from my life, I didn't care about the money anymore. When I returned to my parents' house after that, my parents were furious at my sister's behavior and disowned her. When asked about her reaction, she said, "Oh, really? I don't care, but if you're having money trouble, don't come begging to me, okay? Bye then," making light of even her own parents. I found out from a friend that my ex-husband and my sister got married just 3 months later. I was so stunned I couldn't even cry. I felt nothing at all. For 13 years since then, I haven't seen my sister and her husband. But one day, I got a call from a public phone on my cell phone. I always answer calls for work, so I answered and heard, hello, Ruth? I immediately recognized the voice on the other end of the phone. I don't know how you have the nerve to call me, Rachel. At my words, Rachel chuckled and said, Are you still holding a grudge? You're always so gloomy, Ruth. But whatever, I have a favor to ask. Without showing any remorse for what happened, my sister continued, I'm pregnant. Oh, of course, the father is John, who you loved so much, haha. So I wanted to let my parents know about their first grandchild. They won't listen to me, so you tell them for me. She had the audacity to command me like that, so I retorted, What are you so cheery about when you've been disowned? But she just laughed it off. How many years do you think it's been? 13 years. I think you're the only one who still holds a grudge. You're probably still living alone at our parents' house, am I right? I'm saying that I'll be the one to give them a grandchild instead of you. She's always been the best at irritating people. I'd love to see your envious face, but I'll spare you because it's too pathetic. It'll be awkward when you see me, so why don't you hide in the bathroom or something, haha? She said as she laughed out loud while I remained silent. Then she hung up abruptly after saying she would come over on the weekend. I kept the phone to my ear for a while after the call ended and chuckled. That weekend, when I was relaxing in the backyard, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen and saw a blocked number. It was probably my sister. I answered the phone, annoyed. Hey, unblock me already. I snapped back. What's wrong with blocking someone I don't want to receive calls from? That's what call blocking is for. Oh, maybe you don't understand because you're stupid. Haha. I laughed sarcastically. I heard something break. Perhaps she was irritated. I've come all this way. Why is nobody home? I told you I'd come today, didn't I? Huh? You were serious? I thought you were joking. Besides, you hung up before I could tell you. I don't live there anymore. What? Judging by my younger sister's enraged and slightly shaky voice, it seems she was standing in front of the house we used to live in. However, none of us live there anymore. She was making so much noise and chaos that it seemed likely to cause a nuisance to the neighbors, so I gave her my current address and hung up the phone. After waiting for about an hour, the doorbell rang. There stood a sullen-faced Rachel and John, my ex-husband. The first thing she blurted out was, You've got some nerve, and what is this place? Why on earth would someone like you be living in such a nice apartment? She glared at me, her eyes bloodshot with anger. It's no surprise my sister was shocked. This place is relatively new and located in a good area. The rent isn't cheap either. While it may not be a luxury high-rise, it's a pretty decent property. Ignoring the worked-up Rachel, I told them, "The neighbors won't like all this noise. Why don't you come inside?" Upon showing her into the room, she seemed taken aback by its size. Seeing her frustrated face, I couldn't help but smirk. Our mother, who I live with, was sitting on the couch, silently observing my sister. "Well, you said you had something to discuss. I don't mind at all, but if I'm in the way, should I hide in the bathroom or something?" I remarked sarcastically. "Never mind, I'm good," Rachel snapped back at me. Rachel moved closer to her mother and nervously said, "Hi, Mom. Long time no see. I'm pregnant. That's why today we wanted to discuss if it's possible for John and I to stay here for a while." At my sister's audacious request, I nearly burst into laughter, blurting out, "Wait, you want me to live with you guys? No way. Have you forgotten what you did to me in the past? Absolutely not." Cutting me off, Rachel said, "Ruth, just shut up. This house is still under Dad's name, right? You can't even get remarried and you're still leeching off our parents. How pathetic for a single woman like you." Then Rachel added, "Great job taking care of our folks. From now on, John and I will live here and take care of them, so can you leave? Oh, and where's Dad? Is he at work?" After seeing my sister speaking with a smug grin, I had reached my limit. However, it was our mother who spoke up first, after listening to her quietly. "Dad's gone. He passed away." Mom only muttered those few words. My parents were very serious people and had always apologized to me about my divorce 13 years ago, despite it all being Rachel's fault. My father especially used to say, "I should have. Maybe it was my fault for not raising her better. I'm sorry, Ruth. I'm really sorry." He became increasingly depressed to the point where he found it hard to continue working. At that time, both of my parents were in their early 50s, and we were surviving on my income and Mom's part-time job. A while later, my father was diagnosed with cancer and passed away 10 years ago. Just before he died, he said, "Don't tell Rachel anything. I don't think I'll make it to heaven if she comes to my funeral." Just as he said, Mom and I didn't contact my sister, Rachel. We moved into this house about 5 years ago. It was because Mom had injured her leg due to overworking. We considered renovating our old house, but it was built at the top of a hill, and we thought it would be too hard for Mom to walk up the hill. Since we started living in this accessible home, Mom said her legs have been feeling much better. I tried to speak calmly, but the thought of the late Dad made me want to burst out crying. It must have been the same for Mom, as there were tears in her eyes. However, Rachel's reaction to my words was, in a sense, predictable. "Too little, too late. Besides, it's not my fault Dad got sick. In fact, you're living in such a nice place now because of Dad's inheritance, right? That's not fair. What about my share? Didn't I have the right to inherit?" She blurted out such nonsense. Without missing a beat, Mom shot back, "Inheritance? There's no such thing. You only came to us when you were in trouble for doing stupid things before your marriage. How many times do you think we paid alimony because you messed around with a married man? Live with you? Never. You must be joking. Don't be ridiculous." It was the first time both Rachel and I had seen Mom so enraged. Sensing the tension, Rachel fell silent. Then John, who had been quiet like a puppet until now, said, "Rachel, you've been deceiving me, haven't you? Ever since I married you, my life's been a mess. You're a reckless spender, and you don't do any housework. I had the opportunity to meet some guys who graduated from the same high school as you, and they all said I was blind to marry you." I nearly burst out laughing at my ex-husband's words. He's quite something to have put up with her for 13 years. Moreover, when he approached me, he said, "Ruth, I've been regretting our divorce. Do you want to start over here? Let's let bygones be bygones." When he tried to touch me softly, I felt a chill run down my spine. No way, please. Let bygones be bygones? Who does he think he is? Is he stupid? It's not his place to say that. Just as I was about to dodge him, the door to the next room burst open. "Could you not touch her with your dirty hands, please?" A man suddenly appeared, and both were taken aback. Ignoring Rachel, who murmured, "Who is he?" I said, "I told you to stay hidden because I didn't want to involve you." At my words, he replied, "I couldn't stand it. when he tried to touch you, Ruth. Besides, I think having a third party will help the discussion, don't you think? Okay. This is my husband, Alex, and... Tony, come here. This is our son, Tony. He's 8 years old. I called out to our son, Tony, who was peeping out from behind the door. Perhaps he had heard some of the argument. He was glaring at Rachel and her husband. Huh? You're remarried? Unbelievable. Why? My sister, Rachel, was more surprised than anyone that I had a husband and a son. My ex-husband, John, was just as shocked, gaping like a fish out of water. What do you mean, why? How many years do you think it's been? It's been 13 years. 13 years. Despite all that time passing, you guys haven't changed one bit, which is surprising. Well, you do look like you've aged quite a bit, though. At my somewhat sarcastic words, their faces turned bright red. I met my current husband, Alex, shortly after my father passed away. We were colleagues for a while, and one day he asked me out. When I rejected him, saying that I was a divorcee, he responded, "Does being divorced mean you can't remarry?" and asked me out once more. We got married a year later, and our son Tony was born the following year. Alex treats my mother very well, doesn't mind us all living together, and my in-laws, who already live with Alex's brother and his wife, have reassured me. We're glad you're here for Alex. The one who proposed moving to our current house was Alex, who was concerned about my mother's mobility. I turned to the two shocked individuals. My mother and I are living our lives here. Can you not disrupt? And Rachel, you said you were pregnant. How many months along are you? From their flustered responses to my question, I gathered that Rachel was probably lying about being pregnant. I was only married to John for 6 months, and I never got pregnant. That was the reason my former mother-in-law used to make snide comments. But if Rachel isn't pregnant, it means that's probably the case. Rachel seems to get along with the bad-natured mother-in-law. Unable to stand the harsh glares from my family, the two hastily left our house. I mean, I had heard stories, but is she really your sister? She does look like you, but her character... Anyway, it's settled for now, Alex said with a smile, to which I gave a bitter smile. Really? That evening, the doorbell rang continuously. Looking at the monitor, I sighed. They came after all. When I opened the door, there stood Rachel and John with pale faces. We need help. Can you lend us some money? As they knelt down begging, my husband looked puzzled, but my mother and I felt differently. During the day, while waiting for a call from Rachel, Mom received a call from a certain individual. It was a friend of my deceased father, who currently rents our old home. Him and his family are living there right now. When I came back to the house, I found the flower beds in the garden ravaged and the windows cracked. The security footage clearly showed a man and a woman, with the infuriated woman stomping on the flower beds and hurling stones at the window. Of course, it was my enraged sister Rachel, on a phone call with me. When Mom gave Rachel's contact info to Dad's friend, she was furious to learn that this was the daughter who had tormented our dear father for years. It seems that in the damaged garden there were rare flowers that were difficult to grow, and they'd asked for compensation. They seemed to be struggling financially to the point of having difficulty with housing, so I expected them to turn up again, but I never thought they'd showed up that very day. I must admit, I was impressed by their audacity. I can give you some money, but there's one condition, I said. As I watched them trudge home with slumped shoulders, I couldn't help but laugh and think, serves you right. In their hand was a written pledge I had just made them sign. I had made them write in the pledge that they would never approach me again, in return for me taking responsibility for this incident. But Rachel is still my sister by blood. It's hard to completely cut ties with her. There may come a time when she'll use the power of the authorities to approach me. When that time comes, I'm prepared to fight, using the audio recordings I secretly made 13 years ago, and this time as evidence. Because, you see, I have no intention of forgiving my sister and her husband any time at all. Later, a friend told me that my ex-husband had immediately resigned from the big corporation after our divorce, and started working as a staff member in a fortune-telling establishment run by my former mother-in-law. Because they were family, he was paid a high salary, and he and my sister seemed to have been living a life of luxury. However, a few months ago, my former mother-in-law suddenly passed away from illness, and my ex-husband, who had no talent for fortune-telling, took over as her successor, but the establishment quickly closed down. In their desperation, the couple claimed, "This is a bracelet that our late mother lovingly made." They targeted the people who had faith in my former mother-in-law. However, a whistleblower exposed their lies, and the victims formed a group. The victims began flocking to the establishment every day, and my sister, who no longer had a place to live and work, came to ask for my help. I was so irritated by their audacity. However, seeing that the police have started moving, it's probably only a matter of time before the two of them are held accountable for their crimes. After that, we moved again. The reason was my husband Alex's job transfer. Can I really come along?" Mom asked apologetically, to which Alex, my husband, responded with a chuckle. "What are you talking about? You're an important part of our family, Mother. Even if you resist, I'll carry you over my shoulder and take you along, okay?" Upon hearing Alex's lighthearted joke, Mom let out tears of gratitude.
"Grandma, you're crying again. Here, have a Kleenex."
Observing his emotional grandmother, Tony was concerned but still smiled. And as I watched my family, I felt a wave of gratitude for the happiness I felt.